Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about politics and last week's elections by now, so we're going to leave all that behind this week and look ahead. It's a few weeks late, but the Hochul administration has released an update to the state's finances, and this update is really important. For one, we're about halfway through New York's fiscal year, but for two, Governor Hochul is actively preparing her own plan for next year's budget, and this update will likely influence that. So with me here in studio to get more into it is Patrick Orecki from the Citizens Budget Commission. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
So this was, for people who don't know, the state budget passes ideally by the end of March. The fiscal year starts April 1st, so we're about halfway through the fiscal year right now. What were the takeaways from this report?
Yeah, what we saw in this quarterly update was basically good to neutral news. There was a little bit more money coming in than was expected a couple months ago, and a little less to pay out because of some extra federal money that came through in the last quarter. So kind of both good news on both sides of the ledger.
Do we know why there's more money coming in? Is this just higher tax receipts than we were expecting?
Yeah, this is just higher tax receipts based on actual receipts from July through October, basically. So it does help a little bit. There are still kind of longer term problems. In July, tax receipts came down a lot over a multi-year period. This is good news in 1 year alone.
Okay, so is the trend that we're seeing, is it trending up, or is this more of like a fluke that you see?
Yeah, it's basically temporary, is how I would describe it. It's 1 year. It's based on what we're actually seeing. We'll see there will be more adjustments that will come in January and how we close out the fiscal year in March. But I think everyone was pleasantly surprised probably by what was included in this financial plan update.
What does it mean in the short term? I mean, you know, a couple $1 billion that we weren't expecting is a lot of money, but in the context of the state budget, it's not necessarily a lot of money. So if I'm the Hochul administration putting together a budget right now or whatever, what does this mean for my planning? Does it really make that big of a difference?
It doesn't change the out year stories that much. I mean, you do have a little bit of extra cash on hand to cover some future expenses if that's what they decide to do. But the out year story is unchanged from what we saw over the summer, which is the kind of reemergence of multi-year, multi-billion-dollar budget gaps on the horizon. And
I know a few months ago, the state controller was warning of I think it was $310 million deficit, or maybe it was Division of Budget that was warning of it. So do we see a change in that in this report going into her budget?
Yeah, nothing in the current year. We're still balanced, which is good news. So the plan is still set to close out with zero or even a little bit of a surplus to finish the year. What we're looking at now is both not only those budget gaps on the horizon, but eventually in a couple of years' time, one-time federal aid will go away, temporary tax increases will sunset at some point, and there's still a lot of kind of concern and risk about the economy more broadly. So even under the status quo, we have budget gaps. What if there is a recession or some other disruption?
Yeah, what does this mean for the out years? I guess that would be the long term that we would talk about. So it's looking okay going to this next fiscal year, but in the next couple of years, what are we trending towards in terms of, I know that there are projections of a deficit, some not great financial news, but what are we looking at?
Yeah, it's really two things in the longer term. First of all, is those budget gaps up to $6 billion in 4 years' time that'll have to be dealt with over time. The other is the expiration of non-recurring resources, whether it's federal aid or tax increases. So that'll open up some really big needs to close the gap down the line. I think the good news is what the state did really well around this time last year and in last year's budget was set aside a lot more in rainy day savings than we had done in the past. So that's money that you can't touch unless there's a disruption or a recession, but the state is much better positioned to deal with that type of situation if we keep saving.
Can you help me understand how we get from being in an okay position right now to having that maybe $6 billion deficit in 4 years? What would happen to make that happen?
Yeah, it's really about kind of changing what was expected for growth over time. So if you expect a fully balanced financial plan over 5 years like we had in April, and then you see a kind of overall aggregate decreasing in the rate of growth in personal income, which is our biggest tax source is on personal income. If you lower that trajectory line, over time, the gap gets wider and wider in the out years. So that's kind of what we're seeing, why the gaps are as big as $6 billion in 2027. So
when we're looking at a possible recession, you'd mentioned we put some rainy day funds in. Are we in a good place if we do actually enter a recession?
I think the answer there is a little bittersweet. We are in a much better position than we used to be. We used to only have about $2.5 billion in the real rainy day fund lockbox. Between all sources of reserves, the plan is to get up to about $19 billion. So far, far better than we had. The reality is a typical recession would probably hit us for about $40 billion. So you're still dealing with less than half of what might be needed.
It's a lot of money, and we don't have it, unfortunately.
Right.
We're out of time. Great stuff. Patrick Orecki from the Citizens Budget Commission. Thank you.